Writer's Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands.
Hi, I'm Tracey Grice and welcome to the Writer's Read podcast. One of the quotes that inspires me in my practice as a teacher, in fact it's the one that sits front and centre of my desk at school, is written by Nancy Atwell, an internationally acclaimed author, and she says that for students of every ability and background, it's the simple, miraculous act of reading a good book that turns them into readers. Because even for the least experienced, most reluctant reader, it's the one good book that changes everything. The job of adults who care about reading is to move heaven and earth to put that book into a child's hands. And that's why this podcast exists. On the Writer's Read podcast today, I'm chatting to award-winning South Australian author Marianne Musgrove. Marianne not only writes for children and adults, but she's also a poet. Something you may not know about Marianne is that she is a descendant of King Henry VIII's librarian, so I guess you could say books are in her blood. As well as writing, Marianne also delivers worry workshops. In fact, she won the 2008 Australian Family Therapists Award for Children's Literature for her book The Worry Tree. We'll be hearing more about that later. In 2016, she became a May Gibbs Children's Literature Trust Fellow and a Max Fatchen Fellow. I caught up with Marianne at her home, and here's a sample of what she shared with me.
As a child, I was not a very good reader, and I remember being in year 2 and the teacher had asked us to do some silent reading and I couldn't do it, but I was too embarrassed to say so. So I remember sitting in the classroom looking at the page and just thinking I'll just stare at it for a certain period of time and then I will turn the page and stare at that for a certain period of time and just pretend.
On each Writer's Read podcast, we have a segment called Rebecca Recommends. Rebecca's an authority on children's literature, and she'll be telling us about some of Marianne's other books, and of course, we have an autographed copy of one of Marianne's books to give away. And now, one of my favourite parts of the podcast is hearing our reader in residence read one of their books out loud. So, what are you going to read for us today, Marianne?
I've written a book called Freida. It's part of the A New Australian series, and that's a series of books about girls who have migrated to Australia at some point in history from another country. So I picked Germany because I was a German exchange student when I was 16. And the story of Freida is that she's 11 years old and she has just migrated to Adelaide, South Australia, and a few months later World War I breaks out. And this means that originally she thought that she was going to be welcomed and suddenly she's considered the enemy. So this is a story of a girl who is trying to make friends in a new country, learn a new language and cope, but suddenly people are suspicious of her and she's in a position where she may have to hide her identity as a German. So I've selected a passage to read. This is partway through the book and World War I has just broken out. Now, prior to this, Freida had managed to make some Australian friends and she was very excited. So in this gang of friends, there's Della, who is the eldest, and she is the leader. Then there's Smithy, who really didn't want Freida to join the group, but he finally reluctantly agreed. And then there are the younger ones, Midge and Jam. So if you remember, Della is the leader. And at this point in the story, she has actually fallen ill and Freida is unaware of this, and Freida's gone to their secret hideout just to become friends, to hang out with them. But she is a little nervous because of the war and she's not sure how they're going to respond to her. So I'll just read a little passage from the book. Freida crawled through the tunnel. When she stepped out into the dim, green-lit space, Smithy was sitting on the stump shaped like a throne, Della's seat. "Where's Della, crook?" answered Midge, looking up from her game of noughts and crosses with Jam. Her hair was messier than usual, as if her mother had not had time to curl it in some days. Quinsy, Della's tonsils always flare up in winter. Mum's been to the homeopath. She's making her drink horrible old ginger tea. Freida held out the brown paper bag she'd brought with her. "You've been to Bowers!" cried Midge, and she and Jam leapt to their feet. "What did you get us?" "Berliner buns," Freida smiled, relieved at their friendliness. Jam and Midge did a little jig of joy. Yum! While Freida broke a bun in two, the children held out their hands. "Stop!" barked Smithy, making everyone jump. "No one's eating any Berliner buns." "What? Why?" cried Jam aghast. "Because they're from Berlin." A sick feeling stirred in Freida's gut. When Jam and Midge stared back at him blankly, Smithy explained, "It's where the Kaiser lives. We're not eating any German muck, all right?" He spat out the word German, as if it were a mouthful of cod liver oil. "Pass 'em here." Freida opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. It was as if the war had reached in and stolen them. Smithy got up and snatched the buns from her, but did not, she noticed, throw them away, but stuffed them deep in his coat pockets. "Now," said Smithy, climbing back onto the throne, "I've got a beaut idea for a game." His eyes settled on Freida, and he gave a slow smile. "I call it Catch the Kaiser." Smithy's words were like an icy wind straight from Antarctica. Freida shivered. "How does the game go?" asked Jam. "Is it the same as bushrangers? I love bushrangers." "Bag's Eye Ned Kelly," said Midge, grabbing the stick. "This is my horse." She cantered around the small space, whinnying. "No, I'm Ned Kelly," said Jam. "Early bird catches the worm," cried Midge, shaking her hair like a horse's mane. "Then you can be a worm." "I'm not a worm." Smithy held up his hand. "No one's Ned Kelly, all right? We're playing Catch the Kaiser, and we're soldiers hunting him down, understand?" "Who's going to be the Kaiser?" asked Midge. The three children looked at Freida. "Not me," she cried, the colour draining from her face. "Who else?" answered Smithy coldly. "But I hate what the Kaiser is doing. My whole family does." "If she doesn't want to," began Midge. "Look," snapped Smithy, stamping his foot. "Everyone stop arguing with me. I'm the boss, and what I say goes." "Della's the boss," muttered Midge. "Well, she's not here, and I'm the next oldest, so I'm in charge. Now all of you stop being ninnies and listen to what I say. Freida's the Kaiser, and we're the soldiers, and that's that. Freida, you've got a 20-second head start, so you better get running." Freida stared at him, her feet rooted to the spot. In the dim light, the boy's eyes glittered. "1, he said. 2. Freida looked from Smithy to Jam to Midge. 3, continued Smithy. "Better run, Kaiser." 4. Jam shrugged. "Go on, Freida, it'll be fun." 5, Jam and Smithy chorused. 6. "You better get moving," urged Midge, giving her a friendly shove. 7, the children chanted. 8. Realising there was no way out of it, Freida dropped to her knees and scrambled through the tunnel. The dry grass whipped at her stockinged legs as she sped down the narrow track. "Faster," she commanded herself. "Faster." Though the gang's voices grew fainter with every step, she knew it wouldn't be long before they were after her. When she reached the creek crossing, she searched for the crooked stick in the tall grass to hook the rope. Where was it? Just as she spotted it, she heard shouting, "Coming ready or not, we're going to get you." Freida shrieked. She hooked the rope, her hands slick with sweat. Since there was no time for a proper run-up, she grabbed the rope and swung through the air. But without enough momentum, she wasn't going to make it to the other side. Any second now and the rope would swing backwards, delivering Freida into the waiting arms of the soldiers. She had no choice. As soon as she'd swung as far across the creek as she could, she let go. "Ow!" she cried, smacking her shins into the dry shelf of the opposite bank. As she slid down into the creek, she grabbed hold of a tree root. "He's getting away!" cried a voice. Hauling herself up onto the path, Freida risked a glance over her shoulder. The trio were clambering down the opposite embankment. With faces bright, their eyes flashed like hunting dogs. "Down with Germany! Long live King George! You can't get away, Kaiser, we're going to catch you!" Putting on an extra spurt of energy, Freida raced along the path. She had to find a place to hide quickly. Her mind churned like a water wheel after a heavy rain. She knew that a few streets over was an empty block with a cluster of trees. If she could just make it there without being seen. She zigzagged through the streets and alleyways, ever aware of the thundering footsteps behind her. The empty block was just up ahead. Freida banked left, then right. She checked over her shoulder. No one was behind her. She had a chance. Though gasping for breath, she ran across the block and collapsed behind a large gum tree. As she lay on her back, barely able to move, she listened for any signs of the gang. When she heard nothing, she closed her eyes and heaved a sigh of relief. But a moment later, there was a shout. "Look over there! I see a boot!" Freida yanked her foot out of view, but it was too late. The children had spotted her and were running towards her hiding place. She tried to get up, but her legs had turned to jelly. "Please," she prayed, grabbing hold of the tree trunk. "Help me." "Found you," snarled Smithy, rounding the corner. He grabbed Freida's arm and tried to drag her to her feet. "Don't," she cried, pulling away. But most of her strength had gone. Midge and Jam arrived seconds later. "Look what I caught!" Jam grabbed Freida's other arm, while Midge skipped in a circle, chanting, "Lock him up! Lock him up!" The boy's fingers dug into her skin. "You're hurting me! Let go!" But it was as if they didn't hear her, and instead they gripped harder. As Freida stared into their red faces and bright eyes, she realised they were no longer friends. They were soldiers, and she was the enemy. "I'm not the Kreiser," she shouted. "I'm Freida! I'm Freida!" So we'll just leave it there at that little cliffhanger. So something that readers might like to think about is, how would you feel if you had thought that you had made some friends and then they turned on you because of something that you had nothing to do with? So in Freida's case, the Kaiser, who is the leader of Germany, has made a decision to go to war and to invade various countries. This has nothing to do with Freida, and yet she's being held responsible. So how would you feel if something similar happened to you?
If you like the sound of that book, we've got a signed copy to give away to one of our listeners. The book is about to be reprinted, so you'll be one of the first people to get that book in your hands. All you need to do to win this book is to head across to the Writers Read Facebook page and like and share the episode featuring Marianne Musgrove.
Rebecca recommends.
And now it's time to hear from our children's literature expert, Rebecca Bird. Rebecca really does her research for this segment and really immerses herself in this process, so I'm always keen to hear what Rebecca comes up with. So over to you, Rebecca.
So, we all judge books by their covers, and when I say all, I mean me. But what about judging books by their title? I am absolutely guilty of picking up books because the title caught my eye. One that I can think of off the top of my head is Louis Sachar's There's a Boy in the Girl's Bathroom. So when choosing books for today, I couldn't go past Marianne Musgrove's book, A Beginner's Guide to Revenge, because who wouldn't want to read that? Now, this is a very different book to the one that Marianne has just read from. This is a realistic fiction title. It's a story told by two characters in alternate chapters. There's 13-year-old Romola, whose father is a soldier. He's currently fighting in the Middle East. And 13-year-old Sebastian, whose parents are separated, and he hasn't seen his dad in 18 months. So Romola, being the daughter of a soldier, has moved around a lot. She's been to 6 schools in the last 8 years, and she has trouble making friends. Now, she wants friends, and she does try, but she has this little problem that means she can only be herself, and sometimes being herself is too much for people to take. Sebastian's problem is that he's just found out that his mum's getting married again, to Marshall, a man that he doesn't like. And to make matters worse, Sebastian has to go to Canberra and spend 10 days with Marshall. And it's here that he meets Romola, and it's here that he starts to plan a way to get to Roxby Downs, because that's where his dad is, and surely his dad will want him to come and live with him. Now, revenge is in the title, and revenge is what Romola and Sebastian have on their mind. Sebastian, to get back at Marshall, because he thinks that he is keeping him from his dad, and Romola, because she has taken all the meanness that she can from Riley, and she has the perfect way to get her own back. So when Sebastian does something really mean to Marshall, no, I'm not going to tell you what it is, you have to read the book to find out, Sebastian starts to feel bad almost straight away, and he realises that getting revenge doesn't make him feel as satisfied as he had hoped. So his job is to now convince Romola that revenge isn't the answer for her either. Now, it's a really good story that looks at all kinds of issues that kids might have to deal with. Bullying, divorce, absent parents, but it's also about growing up and taking responsibility for our actions. And in the case of Sebastian, coming to terms with the person that his dad really is instead of the person that he wants him to be. Now, for some strange reason, I started thinking about choose your own adventure books when I was reading this one. And because my brain is capable of going off onto some weird tangents, I started thinking that really all books are a kind of a choose your own adventure. Now, there may not be lots of choices in this book, but every time we pick up a book and choose a book to read, it will take us on an adventure or give us an opportunity to experience things that we might never get to. So why did I think this specifically about this book? Again, it's about the title, Revenge. Everyone has probably had that moment when they're so cross or frustrated about something that they want to lash out at the person that they feel is responsible, to seek revenge. We generally don't do it though, so in a book like this, we get to see what the consequences might be if we did do it. The other book by Marianne Musgrove is for a slightly younger audience than the Freida book. This is her first novel. It's called The Worry Tree. It was published in 2008 and it was the winner of the Australian Therapists Award for Children's Literature. But after reading some author info in the front of this book, it seems that while this is Marianne's first published book, she actually wrote her first novel at the age of 11, a romantic thriller featuring her unfortunate classmates. But back to The Worry Tree. Juliet's a worrywart, and no wonder. Her little sister Oaf follows her around taking notes and singing the irritating song all day long. Her parents are always arguing about Dad's junk. Nana's so tired of craft lessons that she starts barbecuing things in the middle of the night. And Juliet's friends Lindsay and Gemma are competing to see which of them is Juliet's best friend. Juliet can't fit in any more worries. Now that is what the blurb says. And this is a book where we get an idea right from the start what Juliet's like is life at home. So I'll set the scene and I'll just read a bit of the first chapter. Juliet Jennifer Jones opened the door, stepped out of the toilet and walked straight into her little sister. 8 minutes and 47 seconds, said Ophelia, clicking her stopwatch. What were you doing in there? Mum, shrieked Juliet. Oaf's timing me in the toilet again. When there was no reply, Juliet stomped out of the room. Ophelia, known as Oaf, smiled quietly to herself, pulled out a yellow pad of paper and carefully wrote 8:47 in the left-hand column. Then she tucked the notepad back into her pocket and went off to find her sister. Juliet stormed through the house looking for an adult. She went into the lounge room, but Mum had her nose in her favourite Shakespearean play. Give me 5 more minutes, said Mum, and then I'll speak to you. Juliet rolled her eyes and went in search of Dad. Dad was in the laundry making a model volcano, and she couldn't get him to talk about anything other than lava, ash or explosions. She frowned and went in search of Nana. Nana lived in the granny flat down in the back of the garden, but when Juliet got there, all she found was a note taped to the door of the flat. Gone to craft class. This week, macrame holders. Juliet turned around huffing. Oaf was standing behind her singing a song she'd learnt in the playground that week. It was called the Irritating Song, and he just kept chanting it over and over again like this. Irritating, 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 tating. It's the song you'll end up hating just 'cause it's so irritating. That was the first verse. The second verse went like this. So frustrating, so frustrating, so frustrating, strating. It's the song you'll end up hating just 'cause it's so frustrating. So we can see that there is quite a lot of drama in Juliet's life, and that is just at home. So Mum decides that Juliet needs her own bedroom because at the moment she's sharing with Oaf and that's not working out very well. She needs to separate the sisters so that they won't murder each other. That's her words. So they move all of the stuff out of the room that must be locked when visitors come, a room that's filled with all of Dad's stuff, and all of those boxes end up crowding the hallway, but Juliet does finally get her own room. And it's in this new room that we find the worry tree. Hidden under the peeling wallpaper in Juliet's new room is the painting of a tree. Her nana tells her that it's been there since she was a girl. It's a worry tree. All you have to do is think of a worry, imagine it in the palm of your hand, and then imagine an invisible string tied around its middle. And all you have to do is hang your worry on the worry tree, and the animals look after your worry until the morning. So there are all these different animals painted on the tree, and each of the animals are responsible for different worries. So there's Wolfgang the wombat, he looks after your friend worries. Petronella the pig looks after worries about school. Gwyneth the goat makes you feel better when you're sick. Dimitri the dog worries about family. Piers the peacock worries for things that are lost. Delia the duck deals with change. And there's also a hole in the trunk where you can put worries in that are too hard to describe. So as we've seen, Juliet's got a lot going on in her life. Throw in a school bully and a friendship triangle, and you can see that all of these little annoyances can turn into big worries. So Juliet starts to use the tree. Every night she offloads her day's worries onto the worry tree, and she finds that it really does help. So I know that it might seem that this book is quite serious, and it does deal with serious topics like worry and anxiety. There's actually quite a lot of humour in this book as well. So one of my favourite parts is when Mum is asking Juliet to set the table. Juliet doesn't want to do it because it's Oaf's turn. Oaf won't do it because Mum asked Juliet. Neither sister backs down, but neither does Mum. So what does Mum do? She comes into the dining room while everyone's waiting for dinner, and she simply serves 5 piles of spaghetti straight onto the tabletop. And then there's the time when Mum cuts Juliet's hair, and she cuts her fringe so short that it's barely non-existent. So what does Juliet do? She draws her fringe on with texture. And not a texture that can be washed off before she goes to school, a permanent texture. Now, one of the main lessons that I think Juliet learns in this book, it is such a simple one, but it's one that we probably all need to remember, adults and kids alike. We are not responsible for other people's problems. Juliet has always thought that everything was her problem, even if she hadn't caused it. She worries about her mum and dad arguing, her friends competing for her attention, even her annoying sister and the school bully. She realises that she can let so many of those go and let other people deal with their own worries. Now, after reading this book, you're probably going to wish that you had your very own worry tree. Well, guess what? You can have your own tree, and you don't have to paint it on your wall. If you go to Marianne Musgrove's website, click on the teachers page, you will see that you can print your very own worry tree poster there.
Some excellent recommendations there, Rebecca. Thank you. I know that teachers in particular really like the worry tree, and it's a great recommend for students who are struggling in that area of their life, or, you know, finding that their worries are getting on top of them. And the Beginner's Guide to Revenge, as well as being shortlisted for the 2013 Prime Minister's Literary Awards, is one that I know I can recommend straight away to at least half a dozen students who will really enjoy it. So thank you again for your insights into Marianne's work.
Hi, I'm Marianne Musgrove, and you're listening to the Writers Read podcast.
Now it's time to hear more about the reading life of our reader in residence, Marianne Musgrove. Just thinking about some of the students I work with, and what I get really excited about is when they have gone from a person who probably doesn't identify reading as one of their favourite things to do, but then they find a book that lights them up and turns them into a reader. And in your life as a reader, has there been such a book that's either turned you into a reader or changed your life in some way?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would first preface that with saying that as a child I was not a very good reader, and I remember being in year 2 and the teacher had asked us to do some silent reading and I couldn't do it, but I was too embarrassed to say so. So I remember sitting in the classroom looking at the page and just thinking I'll just stare at it for a certain period of time, and then I will turn the page and stare at that for a certain period of time and just pretend that I'm reading. So I really didn't have the hang of it, particularly not reading in my head. And then in year 3, my family went over to Holland for a few months because my mum's born in Australia, my dad was born in Holland. And while we were over there, there wasn't a lot to do, and my mum had brought a lot of library books to entertain my sister and me. And in doing so, I got into reading because I was bored. And one of the books that in around year 3 and year 4 that I really enjoyed was A Necklace of Raindrops by Joan Aiken. And what I like is that it's short stories, and so a lot of different stories. So for a child like me who was struggling with the reading, to be able to just read a little short story and really get into that, but not have to read an entire book until I was ready, helped me. And also it's so imaginative and it's a magical world, and I was writing stories at that point myself anyway. So I did like to write fantasy magical stories when I was at school. Mm-hmm.
Terrific, thank you. And you make a really good point about short stories being a way into reading, and actually had this conversation with a fellow librarian today that our short stories don't move very much off the shelves. And so that triggered in me, okay, I need to get short stories in children's hands. And maybe that's the book, the genre that kind of launches their reading life. So it got me to thinking about habits and preferences and the way that you can build a reading life. So thinking about yourself as a reader, you found reading boring or hard when you were younger. Are there any other struggles that you have as a reader that you could share with our listeners?
Probably a couple. I am not a quick reader even now. So I remember in year 11 and year 12, our librarian ran a course at lunchtime to teach us how to skim read so that we could prepare for exams. And I couldn't do it. And to this day, I can't skim read. So, but one of the benefits of that, of course, is that I read every single word aloud in my head. And so I remember books. And I've only met 3 other people in my whole life who have this same issue where they can't skim read. So it does mean, though, that it takes me a lot longer to get through my books. And so that, I guess the time factor and not being able to skim read would be one struggle. But also I was thinking earlier about Facebook being a distraction, and I actually chose when I moved into my house a year ago not to have a TV so that I would read more. But I kept the internet, and unfortunately YouTube and Facebook has been a horrible distraction. So I've tried to institute screen-free days where I have time to just read and go for a walk.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think it's really valuable for students in particular to hear that a good reader is not necessarily one who reads quickly. And I think that's a fallacy that comes early on, that if you get through a book quite quickly, that makes you a good reader. So taking time is an important message for all of us to hear. But what you've done is turn that perceived weakness into a strength. So when you think about yourself as a reader now, what are some things that come easily to you or you see as a real strength in your own reading life?
I now trust my intuition, and I used to feel compelled to finish a book or a movie or anything that I started. I felt that I absolutely had to finish it, even if I hated it, even if it was the most boring thing in the world. And now I give it a good go. So I don't just abandon something after a chapter or 2. But if I've given it a decent amount of time and it's really not grabbing me, I think I've only got one life to live. I'm not going to waste it on something I'm not enjoying, and so I'll pick something else up. And I've also become more intuitive in the books that I choose. So now if I go to the library or I go to a bookshop or I'm looking at my own bookcase, I just look at the titles, and whatever jumps out at me, I read that.
Okay.
So instead of thinking, I used to think, well, I must read all the classics because that's what a serious reader does. And I have read some of the classics, and some of them I enjoyed and some of them I absolutely hated, and I couldn't believe how boring they were. So, so now it's a matter of reading what appeals to me.
Now, you talk about your intuition and being able to choose that book. And I think that's something that certainly in my role as a teacher librarian, that I'm really working with children to, find a book that they want to engage with, but once they have, it is to broaden their reading tastes and trying different things. So how... what's a tip that you would give young readers? I'm really loving this idea that you're talking about intuition. How do you develop that in a person or get that sort of intuitive feel for a book that, when you're in a library or a bookshop and there's books surrounding you, how do you kind of hone it down to that one or two that you want to check out?
Well, there are probably 2 things that come to mind. The first is that I used to avoid bookshops for quite a long time because I would walk in and feel overwhelmed, and I would feel the pressure to have to read every single book on the planet. And I don't know where this pressure came from, but I felt somehow I was required to read everything. And now I've let that go. I don't need to read everything. So that's that idea of just going into a bookshop and just picking up something that is not necessarily in a genre that I would normally read, but it just has an interesting title or someone's recommended it to me and it jumps out. Now, the other thing that I have done is I asked all of friends and family to recommend their top 5 books to me. And then I made a huge long list of those books, and then I picked out the ones that appealed to me, and I started to make my way through them. And I didn't do them all at once. I also interspersed them with books that I'd chosen myself. But every now and then I go back to that list because I know that those books meant something to them. So if you're a younger reader, it might be worth asking your fellow classmates and your friends what books they like. And you could ask adults too, what was a book that they loved when they were a child? And make your own list, and then pick one that appeals to you.
That's a great strategy. So are there genres that you lean towards more than others? Because I think when I'm working with students and I'm introducing a genre for the first time, and if it's one that I'm not particularly fond of, and I'm always quite upfront and say, sci-fi is one that I really struggle with, but I do challenge them. If there's one that you think I'll love, I will definitely give it a go. But they almost feel relieved when they hear that there's some genres that I don't enjoy reading as much as others. So are there some genres that you prefer to read?
Right. Yes, I tend to read realistic stories that are set in contemporary times. And I've recently started reading historical fiction and writing it as well. When I was in high school, in Year 8, we had to choose whether to do geography or history, and I chose geography. Because it was quite arbitrary. Really, I liked my geography teacher, and so I enjoyed it. But it meant that I am late to learning about history because that was the subject stream that I ended up in. And so now I'm enjoying learning about history through fiction, which is a fun way of doing that.
And genres, are there any that you just find a struggle?
Well, I would say I've read almost no fantasy at all, and it didn't really appeal to me because the style is quite flowery, a lot of flowery language, and my feeling is it took a long time to get to the point. However, I'm prepared to have my opinion changed, and I find myself having a lot of ideas lately that are fantasy related, as in terms of books that I'd like to write. I thought, well, maybe I should read some of them, since I seem to be wanting to write fantasy books. But yes, I have shied away from and because they're so long, and being, as I mentioned, because it takes me a long time to read a book, if a book's more than 300 pages, then I think, that is a big time commitment.
Absolutely.
And fantasy books are also a very long series.
Yeah, I agree. And it's probably in one of the schools I work in, my biggest challenge, because they are prolific fantasy readers. So they're very happy to talk to me about fantasy, but I don't always feel I can meet their needs in the fantasy area because it's not one that I read easily. But like you, willing to have my opinion changed, and they love to challenge me on it because they know that they want to be the student that breaks that not stigma, but that idea of fantasy that I have. And I guess it's because I like to read books that I can connect to or identify with the main character in some way. So the other thing my students love hearing about is places that we read, and they love to share and take photos of the places they read, and we kind of build this montage of all the weird and wacky places that we find ourselves reading. And do you have a favourite place that you like to read?
So I have a couple of places. I have my reading nook in my house, and when I first bought the place, it's the first part of my house that I decorated with a big comfy armchair that I found in an op shop, and I have dedicated that reading nook to nothing serious, no work. If I've got to work something out or plan something, I don't do it in the reading nook. The reading nook is completely for reading enjoyment only, and I like to get a nice cup of tea or a drink, a nice cool drink, and just settle in. So that's great. And also, because I live near the beach, I like to go and read on the beach quite a lot, which is also where I go when I have writer's block.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode with our reader in residence, Marianne Musgrove. It was a pleasure to meet with her. So drop us a line on our Facebook page and tell us about which of Marianne's books you've tried. In the next Writers Read podcast, we hear from another award-winning author, Wendy Orr. She was in Adelaide for Writers Week and she took time out of her schedule to chat with me.
I started school in a French village school, but my family spoke English at home. And so I learned to read and write in French. And in fact, I didn't know how to play school in English. Mm-hmm. So my sister and I would speak English at home, but when we played school or shopping, we had to do it in French.
I loved hearing her read out loud and having her share her stories with me. And I also found out we were kindred spirits. But you'll have to tune into our next episode to find out why.
Writers Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Writers Read by LiTracey, a Dave and the Beanstalk production.